Okay, we're recording. All right. Morning, Casey. I'm gonna do instead of writing out response. I think I'm gonna try. Well, obviously, I'm gonna record verbal response. Um, Partly because, well, first let me say I really appreciate you with these questions. I know that you care about this. Otherwise, there wouldn't be, um, the way you answer the question prompts me to want to respond to you. There's a lot of responses that come on that are just like automatic garbage, impulses that we can't help. A lot of people have a strong position but no real interest in understanding. And this last response that you gave me, I think it qualifies for like a thoughtful response. So I really appreciate that. And I'm doing it verbally or through the video because I'm learning how to share these ideas that I think are more than just ideas, and I think they're helpful or they could be helpful. And I'm learning how to not just hold it inside and live it for myself, but also to share it. And as we share something, we also learn. If we're paying attention, we get feedback, and also my use of my verbal mechanisms is limited. So I'm learning how to be better at using it. So if you don't mind bearing with me through this, I'll do my best. It's not going to be conclusive or complete in any way, but let me do my best just to kind of hone in a little bit on answering your question, and maybe it'll prompt some thoughts or something or some more questions that I would look forward to getting into, because I think with what's going on in the world right now, there's a heck of a lot of questions, and I'm not saying that anything I give you is the answer, but it's how I see the world, and it's been informed by certain experiences and certain mostly it's experiences, and the teachings that I have how to say this, verified, I guess teachings have verified my experience. And so I've come across either, I wouldn't say religious, but I think we met at Shambhala at the Buddhist meditation. And so I think a lot of the teachings make sense to me now because of experiences that have occurred as a result of going into meditation and being reflective, and going into deep states of contemplation. And then also what I've found is application of what I've learned has led to experiences that have verified not even the full depth, but that the teachings are legitimate. So let's see here. So I posted that thing about not wearing masks. As you can see, I've got my cloth covering now because today is May 1st and we are mandated to wear it if we're going somewhere. So I don't have a reason to. It's not my demeanor to protest something in that way and be a dick. So since it's mandated, I'm going to wear it when I need to. When I go into stores and stuff. If it wasn't mandated, I would not be wearing this. But I'm not going to tell somebody else that they don't need to. I'm making, anything I share, it's a suggestion and it's up to the person. But I know that a lot of people think like that's totally selfish for not wearing a mask because of, I could be making other people sick even though I'm not. And I think that's I understand that argument. It's a fair argument to make. I don't think that it's totally accurate. And I'm not a scientist, and I know doctors that get mad at me for this type of position, but I have a pretty good position and I have a pretty good reason for it. And I think that's also why I lose a lot of people when I talk about things I talk about, because we generally relate with the outer world as reality. And that's when people get mad, because it's like, well, you can touch this table and you're going to tell me it's not reality. It's a tricky subject to cover. I'm not gonna get into, the depths of all of that right away, in this. Um, so what I asked, so you answered my question. It's pretty good. It's not exactly what I was asking, because I was asking the scope and trajectory of what I write overall, not just in that one piece. That one piece. I write for the last probably 7 years. I've been writing about the mind. I've been writing about the heart, coming to a place of love and compassion, and I haven't really deviated from that yet. And even posting this article, what I wrote leading up to that article, I think was, sometimes I use what other people write as a mechanism to allow me to write something. Most of the time, I only write my own stuff. And it's stuff that comes from inside. It comes, I have a book series called Thoughts from Sunrise, and it's all things that come from inside and it comes out, and that's what I capture. Once in a while, I'll throw up somebody else's work as a way to sort of capture some of that with my own thoughts, and that's what I did here. And then obviously it gets taken out of context. Context is, the last 7 years of writing, and I write about self-awareness. I write about knowing radical self-responsibility, which is not blaming the world for any single condition in your life. And that's a difficult one, because somebody will always say, well, look what that other person did to me. Or, this ruse of the imagination that you're wearing a mask to protect others. And so if you follow the context and trajectory of the last 7 years or so of my writing, which has been heavily informed by personal experience and continues to be, I would you take that into context. This idea that you're doing something to protect somebody else is also casting off your personal responsibility for your own mind. And this is where it gets a little tricky with modern science, Western science, let's say, because, there is, what we can't know is the unknown. We can't know what we didn't do. And, we have this Western science, and they're showing all this death rates and the spread of disease, and, there's plenty that shows that this does shit all for, protecting yourself or others, and there's plenty of evidence that shows that it actually it does more harm than good. Where I come from, I'm not worried about the physical aspect of it. Where I come from is by my own projection. If I validate a reality that is inherently untrue to the nature of who you are, in appearance, it'll appear to be true. So if I sit there, so this would be like, let's say the difference between empathy and sympathy. It's very subtle. It looks exactly the same on the surface. But deep down, if I'm sympathizing with you, I'm saying, yes, your suffering is a reality. And then because you're suffering, you don't have any awareness that you have a choice otherwise. All the conditions of that reality take form. So, empathizing is subtly different, and as we get into adulthood, we generally lose that ability, because we just buy into these realities that aren't necessarily true, even though they appear to be true, even though we appear to be suffering through it. If you look at, again, this is, as I recall, we met through the Buddhist meditation at Shambhala. So if I can speak to that level of, it's classified as a religion, I think, just legally, so it can have a structure in the world. But it could be considered philosophy, because it's an approach to life. But also it comes from somewhere, and it comes from, let's say the Buddha, the original Buddha, that had an experience of relief from suffering, and he went to share it with people, and he showed methods and how to do it. And I think all religions stem from that. The avatar, the sage, or master that has overcome the limits of the body, and they go on and teach cessation of suffering, and through all their methods. And so those are practical applications that you can do in your life to alleviate your suffering. And what happens, and we know this now with modern science, newer modern science, say epidemiology, I think is what it's called. Um, Things like Bruce Lipton and biology of belief, where we now know that our thoughts, and this is not necessarily new. It's 30, 40 years old, where they started discovering this in under the microscope in a lab. Um, that our thoughts have an effect on things outside of us. And so, let's say if I think about harming a plant, that plant gets stressed. This is trackable, measurable, and I could be anywhere in the world. So I could be over in Australia and think about harming my plant here in Chicago, and the plant would respond in real time as I'm having the thought. So you do that with plants, and why is a plant any different than a human response to stress or to thoughts of harm and so forth? And so these are things that we now know that we can track and measure, and it's becoming more commonly known. It's still on the fringes of an expensive Western medical education. They're you go to medical school here, and you buy into a system of thought, and you're trained in that system. It's very few free thinkers that will allow themselves to navigate outside of that paradigm, because for many reasons, but one that's understandable is it will compromise their income. It'll compromise their standing in their peer group. It Someone like Bruce Lipton and other doctors, they had to give up their tenure and leave to go find a school. Like he had to find a school in the Caribbean, somewhere on an island, that would allow him to do his research, because it was too far out for University of Wisconsin to allow him. The scientists now, and we've known this always happens every time somebody comes up with a new harebrained discovery. Modern, the current science at the time shuns the person, and then 20, 30 years later, 100 years later, it starts to come out like, oh, okay, there's something to that, let's look at it. So we're at that time now, where we're starting to recognize how powerful the mind is and how much of an influence that has over the experience. And this isn't to mean like, oh, just be happy and all this stuff. I have no illusion about accepting the massive pain that you're going through. What I am a fan of is massive, radical self-responsibility, where it's the individual that has to learn how to relate fully with their suffering. And so that's what I'm working on, verbalizing, externalizing, sharing, elucidating how to do that, or that it's even possible. Mostly, not necessarily how to do it yet. What does an old master say? He says, "Go sit." Something happens. I liked Bruce Lee. I don't know if you are a fan of Bruce Lee films or not, but one of the things that has impressed me, and I noticed it, and this is before I was into meditation, but it's something that stuck out. And then once I started meditating, it's like, oh shit, okay, that makes sense. Anytime Bruce Lee got, he wanted to go, like, he had rage in him. He wanted to fight. And he wasn't allowed to, because his teacher wouldn't let him. And so every time he got into a rage, he had to go sit. And so he went into a shrine room, he had all the candles lit and stuff, and he would sit with everything. And the part that really impressed me is that when his teacher was killed by an attack of an opposing school, he sat. He used his discipline, and he went and he sat. He allowed everything to come up. And I learned a valuable lesson about that. And when I was on a Datun retreat in France, and I got word that a friend of mine had died in her sleep. She was 46 years old, healthy, went running every day, and she had a heart failure. And I had the option to leave, but I'd made a commitment to sitting, and I sat through that. And I can't tell you, when you develop the discipline to sit through something intense like that, the waves that come through the body, the awareness that comes through the body and the mind is astonishing. Tons of healing can happen on all different levels, but there's so much hidden in there that I'm not going to share in this video. But it solidified in me the power of sitting and the importance of being 100% fully with what's happening. And it's not a story. It's not a story of loss. It's not a story of pain or suffering. You know, something is happening in you. And as it's happening, you're with it. It was a humiliating experience to sit through, to see what came up in my mind regarding the relationship between us, and all different sorts of things, and tons of connections started to come up. And had I just gone back, had I left the Datun and gone back to be with my friends and be consoled and console, that would be a different reality that would have occurred, that would not have allowed for some things that have radically and meaningfully affected how I relate with my day-to-day life with people that I care about, and how I share myself in the world. So it's easy to make the argument, well, you should be back, consoling, and it's selfish to go and sit. But I think as we continue to live, the more we can refine ourselves, the better we are for the world. And the main part of that is because of how connected everything is. So if my mind is connected to everything, and I heal my mind, heal my heart, and how I see the world has an effect. So as I work through that stuff, and I have less judgment, I have more caring, and that is what goes into the world. And we know this. Let's go back to that plant thing, where if I have a harmful thought of the plant, it gets stressed. If I have a loving thought of the plant, it thrives. And there's plenty of experiments now that show this. That show that our thoughts and emotion have an effect on the water, which is pervasive through our bodies. It's pervasive through all the land, and animals and plants and stuff. So the more one, being the individual, is refined, the more let's just, for lack of a better word, let's call it the psychic connection with the world around it, is affected. And so if I look out at the world in a more benign and loving attitude, that looking out actually has a discernible, trackable effect, with modern scientific equipment. So let's go back to this mask thing, this whole virus thing. And this is where I from the beginning, this is where it's not, we won't know because we didn't do it. But from the start, now we have these scaling up of numbers, which are questionable, because once, it's not conspiracy theory that somebody who's 90 years old and dies, but they had COVID, they're getting labeled as died of COVID, but they were 90 years old, and maybe this was the trigger that pushed them over the edge. And it might sound cold, but they were dying anyways. We're all dying in some capacity. We can't really know when we're going to die. And that's, I think, if we come down to terms that we can't know. All doctors do is buy us time, and time for what? Time to get another, Big Mac, time to buy another car, or time to really look and understand what life is, and why we're here, and what's the use of that time. That's my take. That's my personal take. I'm sure, it's not that everybody has to look at it that way. But let's say at the beginning of this whole episode, let's say there's this real virus going around and it's starting to have an effect. If I look out at the world with fear, I'm validating a reality. And if you're looking at the world saying, what should I be feeling? And it looks like there's a lot of people that are saying, what should I be feeling? And just as the massive amounts of conflicting information that's out there, I think we can agree on that there's tons of conflicting information that's roaming around. And I would say, okay, let me give you a plug here, just real quick. This is this is my one of my books. I got these. I made these meditation books called Thoughts from Sunrise. I'm not really promoting my book right now, so I'm not asking you to buy it or anything. But on my every time I come up with something, so there's some challenge in the world. I almost feel like I didn't need to write 3 books, and I have another one coming out this year. But I generally feel I didn't have to write 3 books. I could have just written the first page. This is it's page 8, but it's the first meditation or contemplation, and it pretty much covers everything that happens in the world, and it says life more often than not shows untruth in an effort for one to discover truth. That's how the contrast of duality works. Do not personalize the nature of the showing. It is a gift to waking up to a deeper reality. When truth is discovered, the contrasting appearances merge into one. And I think, what we're doing is we're trying to come to that place of unity. We're trying to bring our world together, bring understanding and healing. And I think, across the board, that could be said. We don't like this harmony. We don't like this unity. There's something that fundamentally feels wrong about it. It doesn't feel, and so I think, I know you care about your world. There's a lot of things that, just from, seeing your Facebook posts over the years, you care, and you wouldn't be engaging if you didn't care. So, why do we care? We care to bring things together. We want unity and harmony, for the most part. We have different ideas about how we get to that point. But this idea of untruth, and if, how would I tie that in? I forget how I was going to tie that in. Maybe it'll come back. Anyways, so let's go back to this idea of this mask, the virus, and what we won't know. And we won't know that if we didn't buy into the fear and the hype and the misinformation, we don't know if this would have ended up being a non-event, a blip on the radar, because we, in mass, took radical self-responsibility to look inside, to debunk the fear and the myth that we're vulnerable, that, the things that are inherently untrue about us. And I think this is where it gets tricky, because when you are, let's see here, let me pull up a screenshot here of, this is a map from Lester Levinson. So follow me on this. This is, so let's see, I just lowered the wrong one. So let me get this up. Bear with me for a second here. This is a map from Lester Levinson, and this is the realms. Again, going back to the Buddhist understanding of, you've got different realms, and not just Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, everybody has this idea. This is not new news. But you have, here, and this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Gurdjieff. He was a mystic from, I think he died in the 30s or 40s or something, but he was a mystic, late 1800s, or 19, I forget how they count these centuries. Late 1900s, probably. And what he says is that, he went around the world and he studied all these religions. He had this longing to understand, why are we here? And so he went around the world and studied all these different Eastern religions and stuff. And what he came to determine is that we are in the most unfortunate place in the world, of all of existence. There's so many influences that we can't comprehend that are affecting us. And what I've come to understand and know from experience is that we are about 95 or more percent unconscious. Our behavior is automatic, and we don't actually know why we do what we do. When we do something, if I say, why did you do it, you're going to go through what's plausible within your frame of reference and your paradigm of explaining why you did it. And it happens like that. We go, we make up a story that fits in our frame of reference of how the world works. And then we say it, and then it makes sense to us. And so that becomes our reality, even though it's not actually accurate. And I think now in modern psychology to recognizing this too. So it's not just some harebrained scheme or noticing that I have. So let's take a look at this chart. You have self up here. I think in Buddhism, this would be the Mahayana, the Mahayana, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. You know, the three vehicles that take you up to, you know, enlightenment or self or realization, whatever. You know, get to that place of Buddhahood, which they say that everybody is a Buddha, we just don't realize it. And so this is just the way to becoming to realize it. So you've got self up here. This is, as he lists, as home. As I understood through the Buddhist path is, you know, you can get there in a lifetime if you do the work. And then there's this idea, you know, you can go straight, you can just shoot to the top. And so here you see this arrow here. We've got the physical body, which is where we're experiencing mentally, cognitively the world. And the mode of operation there is havingness. And so we're constantly trying to get something and having, we're feeding the body, fueling with the five elements. I mean, literally this body is, you know, it's vegetables, processed food. It's all these things that somehow get configured into this body, and it's constantly shedding cells. So the idea that I am the body is a complete misnomer. But this is something that misses most of us throughout our daily lives, because we are operating through perception of the eyes, and generally locate awareness through the sphere up here. And so we think, I am the body, and so we do everything we can to protect the body. That's where I get into when I talk about, you know, who you are or who we are, that we're not the body, but because we have awareness through the body and we're experiencing life and believe that we're separate from one another. We believe generally, and I'm not saying this is where you're at, but my experience is that generally most people believe that there is a gap between themselves and the other person, and that would be a result of identifying with the body, saying this is me and that's you. And if you look at this map here, you've got the physical body down here. It's very dense. Self exists up here. You've got the causal body. You go into the astral plane, the astral body. And I'm not going to get into what those represent in the experiences that are there, and what you know, more into that. That should be something else. But hopefully you have some general awareness about these, or that, you know, these ideas have crossed your path before. They can seem sort of mystical or magical until this would be why a lot of what I write is confusing to a lot of people, I think, is because until you do the work, this stuff seems unreal. It seems like magical thinking. I know it's been accused of having magical thinking. The only reason that I would even write about something like this, because most everything I write about is from experience, or been informed from experience, and having surrendered so deep. No, don't misunderstand me. I experienced most of my life in the physical body, so this is where the work is done. I don't. When you're up here in the causal or the astral planes, you're not doing the work that you're doing in the physical body. The location of the experience is different. Even though there still is a body experience, but it's not the physical body experience. So I won't get into describing this. Yeah. So anyways, I want to make sure that I don't lose you. I don't want to make assumptions as well that you're familiar or unfamiliar with these things, or haven't had your own experiences of this. So anyway, just understand that the physical body is a very dense body of beliefs. Where I'm coming from is, we are not the body. This body has, at one point, the cells in this body may have been dinosaur dung that got recirculated through, turning into fertilizer, became a plant, became eaten. So basically, our bodies are full of shit. If you want to follow it, it's like something gets decomposed, gets repurposed, becomes a plant, becomes eaten, becomes poop, and recycle this over millions and millions of years. And so, this body here is a giant sack of shit. And I'm learning how to navigate the world in this giant sack of shit. So, you think about that and then see how attractive people really are. It's kind of funny. But that's not who we are. We're not the bodies. And so if you relate with the mind, look at this. The mind is up here. Okay. So if you relate with the mind is above the body, and that has an effect. And so if I'm going to go and relate to the body as the effect, I'm validating a reality that's not who you are. And if you are up here believing that you're down here, it's going to cause the conditions that this is the causal. So your causal up here causes the conditions that we experience down here. And so what I do is I aim to the source. When I write, I aim to the source, and what I share is I'm working on guiding people to go to the source, the causal part, and so that way the physical part isn't filled with suffering. Reacting to conditions is validating a reality that is down here, which is the effect, not the cause. It's just basic life, and I think you can agree, most of the time when we do something is we're attacking the effect and we're not going after the cause. And so most people, if you watch the news, all they do is they share the effect. They don't look at the cause, blaming, we go the easy route. I like the hard route. It's more worthwhile. So hopefully that was followed. Let me see if I can pull up real quick here. If you're still listening, if I have your attention still, let me, let's see, documents, downloads, map of consciousness. If I have your attention, I will pull up, here we go. Yeah, this one. This is a good one here. This is David Hawkins. He had, so understand, everything here relates to physical reality. It relates to the experience you're having right now. So this is the map of consciousness. I did a video about this a little while ago. I'm learning how to speak. So I'm learning how to use the intellect. I'm learning, like, very recently am I actively trying to hone my intellect and my ability to share these things. Most of the stuff I processed internally. I would just sit and do my work. And as I think I'm in agreement with people, like, we live in the world, and so that's where the work is done. So it's not just about sitting; it's actually about actively going into the world and doing your inner work while you're engaged in the world. And so the way that I see that that's effective and important is not to think of some theoretical thing that I have no experience of outside of my experience. And so when I go into the world and I am actively engaged with somebody, that's where you do the work, I feel. I have a strong position that and this goes back to understanding how the mind is connected to the experiences. And so if I sit in Chicago and I think about, and this is where it gets into dangerous territory of the mind, if you don't have a good grasp of your own mind. So maybe I will refrain because I don't have a good frame of reference for, and this is, Casey, this is a video for you. It's not meant as a teaching. I'm giving you an honest response to your questions. And this is why also you can see why I didn't write this. I had to speak it because it's, I think, it's a book. So since this is for you, I'm not going to, and this also, everything I do is public too. So you gave a comment on my wall. It's public. I don't put security measures up on anything. It allows me to look at my vulnerabilities and to release from them. So life is the testing ground for ourselves. Um, so this is public for anybody to see, as any response that I would have written or otherwise. So, but I'm not going to get into what I was going to say. So let's take a look at the map of consciousness here. Um, this is from David Hawkins. He studied consciousness. He's a whole bunch of work on consciousness research. And this, even to people that aren't into spirituality, aren't into psychology, aren't into anything other than just living their life, when they see this map, I haven't met one person yet who has been confused by it or hasn't been moved by it in any capacity. So let's take a look here. This is an arbitrary log of 1 to 1,000, 1 being like bacteria. If you go to 1, the consciousness level of bacteria, and 100 being, say, Jesus, Buddha, some sort of avatar that has reached, full enlightenment. Also understand that enlightenment is not the be-all, end-all of experience. Enlightenment is a stage, and there's tons of growth that happens beyond that as well. So even if someone is enlightened, that's not the end of the journey, and the journey of life and of experience. So enlightenment is a stage, and there are levels that go infinitely greater levels beyond that. But what we can cognitively relate with, and what we can practically relate with in this body experience, generally would be getting to enlightenment. And then from there, obviously, it's a completely different paradigm that those tools would probably be available at that level. But let's worry about where we're at right now. Generally, society is in a pretty low level. Fear, desire, anger. United States is around here, 200. 200 is a level of integrity. Once you go 200 and above, it's life affirming. When you go below 200, it's non-life affirming. And so, if you look at this, you've got your God view, not qualifying God as anything, just the view. Down here, it's a anthropomorphic, taking on the characteristics of, the condemning, judging, vindictive sort of a God, which is the one that I grew up with in my world. And as you move up, you start to see that, what are the teachings, like all being that, perfect peace, bliss, illumination, or the oneness, you come up to this level, and it's oneness, and this is the level of love. So, or 500 up to 540 is love, and that's not even, talk about, just love, and that seems like the be all end all, and it's not. You keep going up from there. But this state of being is pretty incredible, as I understand. So this is where the work is done. This gets to answering your question. So this is a direct answer to your question of not understanding, what was it here? Confused about trying to express face to face with the enemy. You don't disagree, but you don't understand specifically the principle, but I'm saying the virus and stuff. So this gets answering the question, and then this has been pretty long, so I think I'll use this to wrap it up, and then hope that this would suffice as an answer to understanding the position I came from. I actually have no idea if I have accomplished that or not. I feel like I've been rambling a bit, but the virus would exist. What does it do? Here's what I know. It stokes fear, right? So the virus stokes fear and anxiety. This is what I notice. People start wearing their masks. I see people crossing the street when they come across if I'm not wearing my mask. Now, on the outside, you'll say, I should be wearing the mask to be mindful of their fear. And I'm saying, one is I'm working with myself. I'm working with my judgment of them as it comes up to release from that. It's an internal job. I notice I notice what comes up in me. It's like, oh, am I looking down on them? Am I putting myself on a pedestal? And so my work is to bring up even the playing field, so I'm not on a pedestal. I'm not looking down on them for being fearful or scared of some invisible thing, but also am I looking at them as being sick and vulnerable? Because if I look at them, if I even the playing field and I see them, even Stephen, that also has an effect on the other person. That can give that person courage. It also might help the person question what they're afraid of. And this is where I come from. I think that's the most important thing. I think that there's no better thing than to debunk the myths of your fears. And what this virus did, what the idea of the virus did, let me clarify the idea of the virus, because most people overall have never seen or experienced the virus other than through the news and through anecdotal things, but most people have not actually experienced it. So I think that is an inarguable fact. So the idea of it stokes fear, stokes anxiety. And so that's a pretty low level. That is not a life-affirming level. What I know from practice, and this is what, going back to that Bruce Lee thing that I talked about, where, his teacher made him sit even when his teacher was murdered. Instead of seeking revenge, he had to sit. There's a reason for that, and there's value, massive value in sitting with what's occurring internally, because that has an effect on the outer world. It has an effect on your day-to-day relationships and how you impart your heart and mind into the world that you see. So when you sit through that energetically, what it does is it raises your level here on this, either this way. You can go straight up. You can sit through and surrender everything, every attachment to fear, to the all these concepts that hold us down to the physical body. I mean, that's what this is these beliefs in the solidity of all of these things, and it becomes matter, and it makes matter dense. And the more solid our beliefs and our identification is, the denser things become and the heavier they are. And so as you surrender your fear, you sit through it and you cognitively go through and say, is this real? And in the moment, when you check in, it brings you back to the present moment. And across the board, most people do not actually have the virus. So if that individual that does not have the virus says, is this fear real? It's not. And if they say the fear is real, well, that's still a delusion, and they still have their work to do. But if you don't have the virus and you say, is this real? You debunk that fear and you go, let's see here. You rise up, anger. You can be angry at the system. You can be angry at yourself. You can be angry at somebody else. You can be angry at me for not wanting to wear the mask. And you go through that and you process that. But look at what this is. The process is aggression. So you notice the nuances of how you relate with either the other person or the world around you, or what kind of energetic quality that brings up, emotions, and also see if this is a tool for understanding. It's not saying that this is nothing but a tool. So you get to look at this. Excuse me, and see if it makes sense for you. But as you go up, the experience of life changes, and so there's so much value in sitting with these things and relating with them, because ultimately everything is connected. And so if I hold you in mind in a low state, and this is my work, is wherever I'm at on this chart, if I hold somebody in mind that's lower, then I'm also holding them down. And so the work of the world is to surrender what comes up in me, because everything's connected, and that helps not only anybody else, but then I get verifiable evidence from the world that I see, from the interactions that I have. Um, it does help to raise everything up and heal the world. I think doing this stuff is hiding from ourselves. Oh, sorry, I'm going to add one more thing and one other resource in here as well. But in a way, we're hiding from ourselves, which is good. It buys us time. We have to withdraw. Oh, this is funny. I mean, let's not say funny, but curious. What is the level of fear and anxiety here with the viruses? What's the process? When I saw this, it was fascinating. It's withdrawal. Okay, what are we doing with quarantine? Withdrawing. If this doesn't clearly show the level that we're at, which is a fucking low level, and this is so it's not funny. It's sad in a way that this is what we're doing. So the trajectory of what I've written about for the last 7 years or so, since my paradigm of relating with the world has shifted, is this is really valuable, because if you can sit intensely and one-pointedly with the fear, the anxiety, with whatever comes up in that moment, is you can shoot the possibility that you can shoot straight to the top. And that's what most of I think a lot of these people go into meditation, these Buddhists, so-called, that their interest is in enlightenment. So if it's possible to sit with the fear one-pointedly, it can take you straight to the top. It can automatically recontextualize. What happens when you sit intensely with something one-pointedly like this is it recontextualizes everything in your mind. It has an automatic healing effect, which brings everything together. And so when your mind is healed, everything becomes unified. The experience changes, and so the way you see and relate with the world changes as well. That's an automatic byproduct. You don't have to there's no work to do other than your inner work, which is sitting one-pointedly with the moment that's occurring. If you're fearful and anxious of a virus, that virus isn't actually occurring to you right now. If it is, sit with that. If you're on your deathbed, sit with that and relate with, who am I? What is life? It's a good opportunity to do that. No better time than before you die. But if it stokes fear and anxiety, is you sit with that, because you don't actually have the virus. What you do have is fear and anxiety. And to say that I'm going to, I find it disingenuous to say that I'm doing this to protect others, when what I'm doing is I'm validating a reality, and I'm telling somebody else with my action that you're vulnerable, that you're unsafe, and that I'm unsafe to be around as well, that I might give you something. And so what I'm doing is setting up a level of mistrust. When you get into when you get into what that actually does in experience, is, and this is what we won't know because we didn't do it, is that attitude and that level of complacency possibly does exacerbate the levels of deaths that occur and the contagion that occurs, because it's the ideas that are contagious. This is not magical thinking. The idea is contagious, and your belief that it's real also takes on your ability to manifest that in your life. To me, that's an absolute reality. That is not magical thinking. And I say this having related so deeply with things in my life that there has been spontaneous healing. I've sat through, I guess I understand why people wouldn't do it. It's pretty scary sometimes. But to sit through an illness or an infection of some sort so intensely that something comes to mind in how to relate with the world, that the infection no longer needs to be there, or the injury no longer needs to be there. I've had this too many times occur to discount it. So that brings me to the next topic of the mind and the body. So I don't know if you're familiar with Louise Hay. she's considered like a mystical guru of this mind body connection. Um, I came across her years ago, and after having some experiences, and I've seen for myself, it's been true every single time. Um, Different parts of the body relate to different aspects of our life, and so sicknesses, even broken bones. Like if you twist your ankle, let's say you're running, you twist your ankle. I would guide you to looking at your thought process just prior to twisting your ankle. Um, what I've found is that every injury and illness, I found this through my own experience, and then I reference now if I get sick, I reference Louise Hay's body of work um, to help guide me into looking at what it is that I'm avoiding. Is there a relationship that or a decision that I'm not making that I should? And then when I search myself subtly, I see like, yeah, there's something I'm avoiding here. And what I found through my own experience is that if we're not doing something that we should be, is eventually it'll show up in the body. It becomes manifest as a way, like the body is this incredible communication device. It informs us. It's not who we are, but it's a great tool, and it informs us of things. So if I become sick, it means that I've been avoiding something for a long time, for it to get to that level of manifestation. Um, and what we see with a lot of the population that is getting sick is, in mass, we've been avoiding things for quite a while for it to get to that level of sickness. Um, Once you relate with it deeply, there's possible. It's like Tong Len. I'm sure you've heard of the practice of Tong Len, where you sit and you receive other people's pain. This is not hairy fairy stuff. I mean, this is not foo-foo practices. There's a reason they do it, and it's not just to make you feel better. The practitioner of Tong Len feel better. It has that effect, but they found, that um, through the practice of sending and receiving, where you're sitting with you're taking in the pain of the world and the suffering of some individual, and sending out light and love. It could sound magical, but as I understand, they started teaching this to lepers, and some of the lepers started to spontaneously heal. Their lifelong leprosy disappeared, or they just became okay with their condition and they lived the rest of their life in peace, even though they had leprosy, but it didn't affect them psychologically anymore. So these things have powerful effects. This virus is no different. It's an opportunity to learn the tools of self-awareness, or it's an opportunity to blame the world, to try to control the world for one's own discomfort. So if you are uncomfortable with, what I'm doing, that's a lack of responsibility for not taking control of and self-responsibility for your experience, which is the discomfort. It could be totally hypothetical here. I'm not making assumptions, but let's say that, and it's only because I'm relating with you, Casey, directly through this. So I'm not making assumptions of where you're at. I think actually the fact that you're asking me these questions and that you care is that you are not necessarily caught up. You're in a state of wanting answers and wanting healing and so forth. But let's say that what my actions or lack of action in the way that you would prefer makes you feel scornful, let's say. So that would be the level of pride. Again, total projection and assumption. I'm not making an assumption that this is where you're at. I'm just using this for illustration purposes, please. So let's say this makes you let's say you're scornful because I'm not doing something that you think that I should. The process is inflation, and so inflation would be this level where you would be here and you're seeing me here because you're kind of puffed up, right? And that would be the prideful arrogance of pride. Now, what is the pride goeth before the fall? This, I think that's a common saying. If we hang out here too long, then we're subject to falling into the lower levels of anger and stuff, which drags us down, and we get dragged down by the lower level energy forces that circulate the world. So if you can use that pride and release from it, and so this is the thing where letting go and surrendering is. We never really had good teachings until I came across David Hawkins and how to actually let go and surrender. So if you can look at that pride Again, this would make an assumption that this is where you're at. This is totally not what I'm saying, so let's be clear about that. But if you were at this level of pride, what you would do to be released from it is to recognize it, and be totally honest. This is where self-honesty comes in. Be like, yeah, okay, I see the pride. I see how that plays out in my worldview and how I see and relate with the world. There's an energy behind pride. There's a vibrational energy. You can feel it. There's a quality to the feeling, and surrender it. You have to go through the process of surrendering that energy, and you can step into courage, affirmation, and empowerment. So instead of having to hold yourself at a level above somebody else in order to feel validated, to feel important, to feel like you have some sort of control over your life, is you surrender that's associated with it, and you step into courage. Be like, oh, you know what? I don't need to be up here in order to feel valuable, in order to feel heard, in order to feel verified in my experience. So that takes courage, and now you're at the level of, breaking on the level of 200. Because when you cross from courage to neutrality, you're at the life affirming level. Again, this is a tool. You can accept it or reject it, or I would hope at least consider it as a possibility for relating with the world. And so you become more permitting. Things are feasible. Courage, affirmation, empowerment. And this really allows you to step into this place where neutrality, where things are the way they are. I don't have to get caught up in all of this lower level stuff, the fear and the anxiety, the desire, the anger and stuff. You can step beyond that. You can come to this neutral place, and there's a lot. That's a huge step. And at that level, there is a massive amount of peace that occurs because we can let go of what we've been carrying forward all this time, all the anger, these heavy, dense energies that really are, I think, across the board, not much fun to experience. And that allows you to step into an area of your life where a lot more positive things happen. Relationships start to change. They become more beneficial. They become more outwardly beneficial. Everything's beneficial because it can allow us to step up from these things. But at this point, it just becomes overall better experience. There's more optimism, intention. And this is about where United States was in this level of neutrality. A bunch of people have been up in this area up here, and a few, or about very few people alive are in this level. But it's something to shoot for. When you see how this works, so if this idea makes sense, there'd be a lot of reason to not hang out in these areas, because these are self-affirming, lower, non-life affirming levels. And if you can see that this is where the world stepped into this withdrawal process of this quarantine, it's a good time to look at fear. And so the last, and these, what happens on the level of the body is things become manifest. So if you hang out in this area, you're prone to getting sick. The anxiety becomes real, and you become your synapses are open. Your synapses are a match for the virus. When you come up into these areas, you're less likely. Your synapses, your physical body is less likely to inhabit these things. And so what I've been writing about for the last 7 years or so is about this, that this is a possibility. These levels of existing in the world are a possibility, and these levels have an effect on these levels, and eventually it's all one. Okay, eventually we're all one. We're just this ruse of the imagination that we're doing. But while we're in it and we care, it's important for me to share the possibilities, the view that we don't have to be susceptible to these realities that are not life affirming. Back to the Louis Hay stuff, the body, is if you look at what's occurring, if you sit with, let's say you get sick, and you sit with it, it can bring to mind the cause of the sickness, and that would be So it's in the mind, and so yeah, and I know people get upset when the idea is suggested that um, it's all a mental thing. In a way, it is. The body's the effect. Okay, and I think this is where we come across some fundamental differences in how we relate with the world. Generally, when there's negative feedback, even like doctors that respond to my stuff sometimes, and they're like, "Well, it's the body and science and all that stuff." They're dealing with the effect, and I think that's what challenge is. That is a. I hope that I was able to explain that position in a way that's somewhat understandable. But the mind is up here, the body's down here. When you work with the mind, you work with your emotions, which, as we covered, have an effect on things outside of us, whether it be plants or animals and stuff. We can now track and trace this verifiably in quantifiable experiments. And so the mind is cause, body is effect. If I do something that validates the effect, it keeps people trapped in this experience and continually reacting to the world instead of working with the mind. Once we work with the mind, the effect changes down here. And so what I write about and what I work on guiding, and that's what I'm learning how to speak properly and effectively. I don't think it's necessarily effective yet, and I'm working on that. So if you're still listening to this, I appreciate it totally. But what I write about is guiding to the mind. To sum it up, to answer your last question, not understanding about relating with the enemy. The enemy exists in the mind. A Muslim is not the enemy. The idea that I have about a Muslim is the enemy. If I surrender, if I go, and I've traveled around the world, and I use this practice, it's from A Course in Miracles. So A Course in Miracles it says, I can go on forever about this stuff. I'll try to sum it up soon. It says, first two lines, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. So, interesting, because if nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. I experience so many things in my life that appear to be able to be threatened. But if that's not real, then what is real? And we get up to when you, and I use this as a practice when I spent 3 months overseas, didn't speak any languages. I went to a dozen countries, and I purposely went in the neighborhoods that I shouldn't be in. I put myself in situations to be able to surrender. So I jumped off the deep end. It's tricky because not everybody's a deep end jumper. We like to get into the shallow water and start to swim out. But I like jumping off the deep end. I find a lot of value in it. And so I would go into situations where you normally wouldn't go. Neighborhoods, purposely leaving my cell phone behind, or letting the battery die, and not speaking the language, not knowing where I am, and using it as an opportunity to come across situations and surrender the fear that comes up, the judgment, because what we experience is our judgments. And so if I have a judgment about somebody, which would be, they're a different color, they're a different race, they're doing something I disagree with, or some, it's like all these things, you surrender from it, all of a sudden the experience changes. And so all of a sudden that person, you're meeting the spirit of the person, not the effect of the person, which is the effect of my thoughts. And so when you surrender everything, you're meeting the spirit of the person, and all of a sudden, they give you a wink and a nod, and you're sharing a beer together, not even speaking the same language, and 4 hours later, you know that person far better than you know someone in your own family, even not having spoken a common word. It's a pretty amazing thing that occurs. So those types of things have informed me that the mind is the cause, and so we work with that. We work with the mind, and the effect is informative to how well we've done, for sure. So you look at the mind, and so that's internal work. That's your inner work, is working with yourself, releasing from those lower level gravity emotional things and the levels, and you rise up and the experience changes. So the enemy is in the mind, and so the virus, the idea of the virus is the enemy. If you work with that, because I'm assuming you do not have the COVID thing. If you do, then you go to, you go to see, you do what you're going to do anyways. There's different levels of relate with the world. And if you're going to see a doctor, go see the doctor. I would never say don't go see the doctor, just sit. That's your personal choice how you get to relate with things. But I would also say there's incredible value in developing the practice of being able to sit with something. And so you use it as a tool to sit, motivation to sit. Be with the intensity of the experience, and throw away everything else. So the enemy's in the mind. I don't think we've gone to war yet for a real reason. We have an enemy, we hype up this enemy, people become fearful, they buy into this idea that there's an enemy, we subscribe to war because that's how we defeat the enemy, and we're playing this game of win and lose, and nobody wins in that type of a game. Everybody wins if we surrender everything in our mind that creates an enemy. That is where people win. We don't win with a war. This is not a virus we're trying to defeat. That's what they say. The news will say it. There's this virus. It's an enemy. Well, I guess they even say it, right? The virus is the enemy. We're going to defeat it. All the doctors are on the front line. This language is disgusting because it keeps us trapped in this idea that it's something to be fearful of. So, if there's an enemy, there's fear and anxiety. And, the language that's being used is perpetuating this idea that there's this enemy out there, when really it's our belief in the enemy that exacerbates and perpetuates it. I think I'm going to stop. I appreciate you, again, listening to this if you've made it all the way through. I could go on for a long time fleshing these things out, but I want to try to make this somewhat comprehensible or somewhat comprehensible. I hope I would appreciate, if this was clear or unclear, you can let me know. I did my best to answer the question, and I think, as you can see, why I did it verbally and not written. This is, this is a lifetime's work. This is not, you just do, okay, so you can do it. You can just sit with something and it fixes your whole world in a way. Rare that happens. So the life that we live day to day is the work. We go out and do what we do, go to work, we have our relationships, we have all this stuff that we do, our goals and dreams that we are going towards, and that's the context in which we do the work, which is self-awareness of sitting with the self, seeing what comes up, and if it falls into these categories, anything below, if it falls into any category, when we find ourselves in the body, is a good sign that there's work to do. So notice these things that come up, learn how to surrender it, and the more we do it, the more nuanced it becomes, and the more you notice. It's like a pile of laundry. You can have a pile of laundry. Once you get into it, it's got socks and underwear and shirts and jeans and stuff. And once you pick up a piece of clothing, all of a sudden it's got fibers. It's got different, like latex or nylon or cotton or polyester or whatever. And you get into those, and the different elements go down and down and down. And so the more we work with our emotions and our mind, the more nuanced it gets, and the more subtle it becomes, and you start to notice more. And you start to notice more of the connection between, where I was at, when I was in this place of fear. Man, I had some bad relationships. People were coming at me. I had, theoretically, this is, and from experience as well. In the past I have had some, pretty bad experiences, and when I look honestly at where I was relating to life, I noticed oh yeah, it totally makes sense that they did that to me, because that's where I was at. And since everything is connected, I would be hardened to say, I don't know if that's the right word. I would say that because that's where I was at, that also had an effect on how that person treated me, because most of what we do, as I covered earlier, is like 95% or more unconscious. We don't actually know why we do what we do. And then we come up with a plausible reason that fits within our paradigm of that we can say like, oh, I did this because of this, but that only fit because I have that framework to pull from to justify what I had done. Most of what we do is drawn out of us, and it's drawn out of us from the other person's thoughts about life and so forth. So that's the importance of why I write the way I do, and why I would share something that says, well, these things are not necessarily important to do, because you're also validating and verifying a reality that is living off of the effect and not the cause. Okay, I said I was gonna stop. I gotta stop myself. I gotta get to work. And I hope that was enough. If it's not, if you want to sit down, Casey, and like shoot the shit and chat about it, I'm more than happy. I've got my place set up to have these conversations, and I would like to do that. I would like to find people that are willing to engage in these, because I think they are beneficial and helpful to the world. My purpose in the world is to share this information and to work on myself, because I'm not saying that I'm anywhere near this top level. There's no illusion on that. I'm still having the experience. I'm having a shared experience with everybody else, and we all try to help in the way that we can, and this is the way that I can, that I'm aware of right now. So if you're interested, or nobody that is interested in having an honest dialogue about this stuff, I'm more than happy to, and I would love to. So okay, I'm going to check out. I appreciate you. I appreciate your honest question and your willingness to engage. And we've had a previous engagement before, and you've also shown that you're thoughtful. In initial response is sort of like and then when I was able to engage you more, you were thoughtful and meaningful in how you responded. So that shows me that you care, and you have no idea how much that means to me. So peace, and till the next time.